We are going to get started. We are live. This is being broadcast all around this room right now. No, actually, in all seriousness, for some of you who may not be aware, there was a story in the Times Standard on Sunday about our Humboldt Institute for Interdisciplinary Marijuana Research. That was picked up by the AP, and my email inbox and my voicemail has been pretty busy since Sunday because lots of media outlets have picked this up and there's a lot of interest. And it's been actually kind of fascinating, some of the headlines that have come out of this story. As we all are aware, living in Humboldt County, whenever we travel outside of the county, we refer to it as the snicker factor. Oh, you live in Humboldt, wink, wink, nod, nod. What do you bring in? That sort of thing. And so this comes as no surprise that the Washington Post's headline is pot being studied at, I wish I remembered it, pot being studied at Humboldt State University, this is no surprise, something to that effect, kind of playing on that reputation. Those of you who are not aware of this, this talk is being sponsored by the Humboldt Institute for Interdisciplinary Marijuana Research. We are a group of faculty across the social and physical sciences who became very interested in studying the social, environmental, the health, economic impacts of marijuana, not just in our local community, but also thinking about it more broadly, as we seem to be at a point in history where, at least in U.S. history, in the 75th year since marijuana prohibition began, to actually revisit public policy and explore what might be the consequences of marijuana cultivation and consumption, and trying to add to and better inform public policy decisions. The Humboldt Institute for Interdisciplinary Marijuana Research is not an advocacy group in any way. Our interest is in supporting and advancing scholarly research on the impacts of marijuana on a variety of different levels. And so we're open to any disciplinary approaches that are interested in supporting that mission. So with that, we also have enormous and I should say wonderfully consistent support from our university administration. I want to acknowledge President Richmond is here, and also out of the Chancellor's office down in Long Beach. There's a strong conviction that this is an important area for inquiry. We are well suited, well positioned in Humboldt County to be doing this kind of work. So that's my plug for the Humboldt Institute for Interdisciplinary Marijuana Research. My name is Josh myself. I didn't say that already. My co-chair is not here yet. The co-director of the Institute, Eric Escher from the Department of Economics. We are sponsoring the speaker series. This is the third in a 7-speaker event that's going on through April. And I will just draw your attention quickly to our next speaker that'll be coming to, well, she's already on campus, but she'll be giving her talk the end of January 29th. Dr. Monica Stevens from the Department of Geography will be giving a talk on data shadows of the underground economy. And if you just can't wait for her talk, I believe she's giving a TED talk at the Arcata Theater Lounge next week. And so that may be of interest to you. I'm pretty sure does that sound right?
It is.
December 6th?
That's right.
So you might want to check that out. And we have talks each month running through April. You can find out more information about the Humboldt Institute for Interdisciplinary Marijuana Research on our website. It's humboldt.edu/HIMR, HIIMR. Okay. So our speaker tonight travels all the way from Founders Hall. And it is our speaker is Jason Plume, who's just told me he's officially halfway to having his PhD. 3 of his PhD committee members have signed off on his doctoral dissertation, which he's going to be presenting. So it's very exciting. Beyond Founders Hall, or prior to Founders Hall, Jason was he's with the Maxwell School at Syracuse University. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for this evening.
Thanks, Josh. Before I get started, I'd like to thank a couple people. One is Miles Ross, who crafted this nice map we will soon view of medical marijuana and decriminalized states. And also for the Institute of Study of Judiciary, Politics, and Media at Syracuse University. Way back in 2007, they gave me a small fellowship and said, go to town, study this subject. A lot of people don't like it. A lot of people won't engage it. A lot of people won't embrace your ideas. But go ahead and try. So I really got to thank them. Most importantly, I want to thank Himmer for constructing the speaker series and really breaking new ground and understanding of a substance that, well, has a lot of, let's say, influence and impact in American culture, politics, economics, and history. So with that, I want to give you the content overview. Be patient with me. This is going to be a buffet of information. It's not honed to just reform or just legalization, just the elections. It has all of that. It is a synthesis of my dissertation, which took many years to write, as most dissertations do. Also a synthesis of information and data that I am still putting together and will be submitting for publications. And also some data that's brand new. And what I mean by brand new is less than 2 weeks old. Some interviews from city council people that you elected. You hired good people, I'll tell you that. And also campaign directors from legalization states. So the first section, what I'm going to do is give you 8 questions. Please don't answer them during my talk. But normally that's what I would do when I teach. I infuse my lectures with questions. But hopefully there's something for everybody. Okay? Some things you will have heard of. Some things you'll know you thought that was the answer to the marijuana question in America. Some things it will complete the puzzle for you, hopefully. Okay? So the first 2 questions deal with public opinion and what I call an industrious sentiment. And we'll get to that in a minute. And I know you've heard this quip before. Okay? It's coming soon. An acceptance of marijuana in America and the cultural paradox of marijuana. The second part is marijuana policy history, and that deals with questions 3 through 5. The drive for marijuana regulation, past and present comparisons. What I mean by that is that unfortunately there is no regulatory scheme, no bureaucratic structure specifically crafted for marijuana. What the federal government has tried to do, and now states and localities are attempting to do, but in a better way, is take an already existing regulatory scheme and apply it to marijuana. What I mean by that is specifically tobacco and alcohol. Okay? So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then the next steps. Where do we go? Now that we have this proliferation of reform, medical decriminalization and such, then I'll look at reform. Okay? And that's really the main thrust of my research, but just a part of this presentation. We'll look at medical decriminalization, lowest priority laws, and legalization. And then finally, I give you those interviews I conducted in the last month, and I asked the campaign directors 4 separate questions, and Shane Britton I asked a litany of questions, but I only focus on certain answers he gave, and then the conclusions, okay? I want to start with public opinion. All right, we know that there's a growing trend in America to accept marijuana, either medically or legally. This is the latest Gallup poll, 2011. Even though it cuts off at 2010, it really goes to 2011. This is the first time since Gallup started asking this question in 1970. Why is that 50% of the people in America polled say yes to legalization? Why is that significant? Well, if you go back to 1970, why is 1970 significant? Because that's when what is called the Controlled Substance Act was ratified by Congress. So I'm going to talk a little more about that. That started federal prohibition once again. Okay? That put it under the auspice of the control of the Department of Justice. We see throughout the 1980s, it holds that about 3/4 of Americans say keep marijuana illegal. That shouldn't be surprising to those people that are not so old and that are older. Reagan eras, very conservative, intensification of the war on drugs, intensification that marijuana should be grouped with other more insidious substances. Okay? And then we begin to see a downward turn from saying keep it illegal to legalization. Okay. I like to experiment with the PowerPoint, as you can tell. I think you all should. So what about public opinion and inclusion? Meaning, is it just one segment of the population? Is it just a chunk of the population that believes in legalization? No, neither age nor ideology. Marijuana is neither holding to age or ideology. As you can see, hopefully you can see, liberals 69%. This is again 2011, but just about a year, 13 months old, this poll, say yes, legalize it. All right, independents 57%. Those 30 to 49, 57% as well. And then we see geography too doesn't hold it. Midwest. We don't think of people in the Midwest in Iowa and Indiana, Illinois, Nebraska as saying, you know what, we're cool with weed. But they are, in the majority at least, those that are polled. Then we see down here in the South, we're not surprised by this, are we? Really in the South, it's a conservative culture. It's the heart of the Bible Belt, okay? But still 44%. And you're saying, well, 44% is not majority, Jason. Oh, yes, I'm not a math major, but I figured that one out. I'm going to tell you something though in a minute. Look at the Republicans, 35%, conservatives, 34%, 65 years old and plus, about one-third, say, we're cool with legalization of marijuana. Those are people that grew up prior to the Controlled Substance Act, prior to Nixon's inducement of federal prohibition. All right? They have a different take on it. They also grew up outside of the culture of drugs. Because with the war on drugs, proliferated a culture. Many people said, I don't believe in that, okay? I tell you, let's put it this way. I bet President Obama would have loved 35% of Republicans to have voted for him. Think about it that way, okay? It's overwhelming. Also, there's a cultural, political, economic, and social history to marijuana. The cultural acceptance dates back prior to 1970. We know this. Every piece of historical research I found prior to 1970, prior to the 60s really, about marijuana, guess who was associated with marijuana? Jazz musicians, all right? Or undocumented immigrants, all right? Or communists, okay? So there's this cultural history, really cultural myths. There's a social history. What do I mean by a social history? Well, if you know the subculture of drugs at all, marijuana is referred to as a social drug. The more insidious drugs are not. People don't hang around for the most part in large groups and pass a heroin needle, folks. That's just a reality of life. I'm not trying to make it sound nice, it's just a reality of life. Okay? But it's been known since the 1950s and 60s with the baby boomers. All right? And when they went to college, okay, would smoke a doobie together, okay, would drink together. It was a social drug. It has a social history in America we can't deny any longer. I'm going to talk about the political and economic in a minute. And there's a paradox. And boy, political scientists, if anybody, love paradoxes. Why? Because we can go on and on about the answers, but we really don't absolutely solve them. All right? And that's what I teach my classes, the paradoxes of politics. For the most part, again, those poll numbers show we accept marijuana. Maybe we'll allow it to be legalized. Okay? We also either have tried it, know somebody that's tried it, or we're liars. Okay? And then yet, it's still federally illegal, prohibited. Okay? That's your paradox there. I thought somebody would like that for some reason. All right. Here is your industrious sentiment. The quip I have heard for the last 5 years. And I always tell my classes this. I keep hearing it at cocktail parties. The truth is, I don't go to cocktail parties. I just like to throw that in there. But you hear it all around, right? People will come up, you know what? Why don't we just legalize it, tax it, and get the revenue from it? Boy, that would be nice. That would be so fast. It would be quick. You know what? It has a crux of truth to it. It has a validity to it. Okay? Viability, let's say. But it's Americans, even though they like quick fixes, they do not like quick change. They do not like policy enacted too quickly. It's bad for them. Think prohibition, alcohol prohibition. Let's look at some numbers, shall we? The only peer-reviewed, widely published article on marijuana is simply titled, Marijuana Production in the United States. Well put, Mr. John Getman, an economist. He says that marijuana accounts for approximately, this is 2005, 2006 numbers, through a set of proxy variables and elimination of other costs and expenditures, he comes to this number, $36 billion. $36 billion. Yeah, I said it again. California accounts, according to Mr. Getman, for about $14 billion of that. All right? And it's not a legal state. You know, Colorado and Washington are saying, oh, we're going to grab that billions. Okay? Let me say this. 30 states in America, marijuana is a higher cash crop than their best crop. Think about that. That includes states like South Carolina, all right? A very conservative state. It's grown in all 50 states. It's grown in different variations too, okay? Hemp, the non-THC form of cannabis. What about locally? Because that's what we're going to talk about too, especially at the end of this presentation. Jennifer Budwig, a journalist and a business management graduate student, came out with this, I think a year or two, was it? Yeah, year ago, sorry. She says out about one every $4, cash dollars that is, remember it's always cash, can be attributed to grower money. About $415 million annually in Humboldt County out of the $1.6 billion dollars that are spent or exchanged in Humboldt County. I can understand why people are worried about losing that money, at least part of it, okay? What else? The economic potential of marijuana. Most likely the price of marijuana would rise with taxation if legalized. There's no doubt about that. It has to. All right? Is that enough to scare the growers from wanting to go legal? No. Because with raised prices, raised profits. All right? Am I here advocating legalization? No. I'm advocating a better understanding of the policies and the options we have and an incremental change. That is at the crux of this presentation. I'm not an advocate. All right? However, the evidence and numbers are overwhelming. Tax base for local communities. These are just examples. Why do I exemplify these two communities? Because they're not LA. They're not San Francisco. They're not Boulder, Colorado. They're not New York City. All right? Just imagine the dispensaries, the number of dispensaries in Los Angeles, the numbers in San Francisco. This is just San Jose and Colorado Springs. First 4 months of having medical marijuana law, according to PBS.org, Colorado Springs garnered $123,000. Now that's not an exorbitant amount of money, but it's a lot of money in the first 4 months you didn't have at your disposal, and it can fund a lot of social programs. You can put it back in to the structure of medical marijuana, back into legalization structures, and you can strengthen it and you make it specifically spent towards marijuana. Marijuana studies, education, okay, and to benefit the community. And therefore the community wouldn't harbor poor thoughts about growers as well. They can become part of the community. San Jose, not too far from us. The first month with a 7% tax on medical marijuana, almost $300,000. That's a lot, okay? These numbers are definitely increased throughout. There's no complete numbers on Los Angeles County. Why? Why no complete numbers on Los Angeles County? Because of continued attacks by the Drug Enforcement Administration, the Department of Justice, in busting dispensaries. There's no continuity in their tax revenue generation, all right? Not to say they're not garnering money, they are. All right? This is just to give you an idea of the viability, the economic viability of marijuana, at least medically. We turn to the second question, and it addresses the title, okay? What do I mean by green institutions and incremental policies? Yeah, I'm a purveyor of puns. I like them a lot, but it also has a direct meaning. But first, let's look at what we presently have. Status quo federally. Prohibition, I know many people don't believe this, it is a rational policy. It maximizes utility. It's self-interesting for those that profit from it. I don't mean profit necessarily monetarily, but profit from the perpetuation of the policies, the drug enforcement agents, okay? The Department of Justice, the federal government can contain the drug itself, the substance. At least they can authoritarily. Second, as one prominent marijuana scholar has recently stated, marijuana is unregulatable. I totally disagree. Many people say you can't legislate morality. Now, as much as I wish that was a very true statement, the government attempts to do it, not just our government, many governments attempt to do it over and over. You can regulate just about anything, all right? Marijuana can be regulated, but it can be regulated to a benefit. So green institutions, this is what I mean. Regulatory institutions, bureaucratic agencies, and laws are neither presently nor have been configured specifically for marijuana distribution via legal sales. There is an incredibly profitable illegal market out there, and it's been going on for a long time. Many growers, many distributors have been in it for 3, 4, 5 generations, there's no doubt, okay? And they have reason to want to protect the market. It would be better protected legally. That's just evidence to that. Incremental policies, articulated, well-thought-out policies specific to marijuana that are not holding to quick fix mentality, rather based on scientific facts. There has been a huge lacuna, okay, a lacking by the federal government when it comes to applying policies that are founded on what's called the science base, all right? Not until the last 10 years, studies, natural science studies and social science studies have facts come out. They show that legalization is safer than prohibition. Most of these studies are coming from Britain because the studies contained in America are contained by the federal government. They have to sanction research, understandably, when you have prohibition as your centerpiece policy. That allows myths to sustain. So we have to put on our best green suit. That's what we have to do, right? We have to build incremental policies that serve a progression in society. And if you haven't realized that already, Washington and Colorado have. California and Oregon voted on it as well. Okay, 18 states I'm going to get to in a minute have passed medical. So the last years, dispensary booms and busts in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Montana. What do I mean by this? Well, even though the federal government has continuously come down with raids on Los Angeles and San Francisco, dispensaries have proliferated. Okay? To the point LA County said this time, we will cooperate with the federal government in your bus. Then the federal government sent out one final threat and said, we are going to bust 67 more dispensaries in your county. LA County said, you know what, we've had enough. We're not going to cooperate with you. You do it on your own terms. You won't use our police because this is an economy that's here to stay. We will regulate it. We will zone it correctly, but we will deal with it. If you want to cooperate, that's another issue. We're going to stop now. San Francisco, they waver quite a bit. Why do I put up Montana? Well, Montana was busted this year for a different reason, and probably a more substantial reason, tax evasion. They had a very good bureaucratic structure when it came to their medical marijuana dispensaries and distribution schemes. However, the federal government said, you know what? A lot of your dispensaries aren't paying proper taxes, and they're actually cheating your state of Montana. And Montana said, oh, well, rather than fight the federal government, come in, bust us. They survived that wave of tax. I use that too strongly, but that wave of federal enforcement, let's say. However, they persist. And I'm going to get to Montana as a special case. They are the best case, probably, incremental policy and citizens thinking about the issue. I'm going to get back to them in a minute. Decriminalization, a popular state-level policy. If you're not familiar with decriminalization, guess what? You're living in a decriminalized state when it comes to marijuana. What is this? That just means that if you get caught, usually with a less than an ounce of marijuana, 28.5 grams, you will get a ticket, an infraction level. You won't get a misdemeanor or a felony, which is great, right? That doesn't escape federal persecution, especially students here with federal financial aid, okay? But this is a decriminalized state. They'll write you a ticket. Also, some localities, such as Santa Cruz, Mendocino, and Humboldt counties, no wonder I picked those. They're highly producing marijuana counties. Experiment with physician quality checks, dispensary zones, and growing permits. In 2006, I interviewed the great former mayor of Santa Cruz, Mike Rotkin, a wonderful gentleman, fought federal aggression for many years. And he said, you know what, I embrace, this is 2006, 215 was 10 years old. I embrace the state policy. It serves my community well. How can I enhance it? How can I make it more legitimate? And he says, I have a dispensary zone. I don't have dispensaries out in industrial complexes. I have them in their own zone. Yeah, I call it the green zone. What else would I call it, he said. And he says, I've hired physicians to do quality checks on the marijuana that is sold. And then he said to me, I know what you're going to ask next. I go, what is it? He says, what do physicians know about weed? And I go, yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. He goes, they know nothing probably, unless they know of it already. Maybe they've smoked it or whatnot. But it brings legitimacy to the policy. They do know what's healthy to go in your body. They should at least. Or they know what's unhealthy to go in your body. So he did that on his own. Dispensary zones. I think a lot of communities have these or they're fighting with them. I know I lived a long time in Kern County, anti-marijuana county, to say the least, folks. They now are not quite, but they're debating dispensary zones, okay? To give you an example, we know the others are marijuana-friendly counties. And growing permits. And the sheriff of Mendocino County, he had this going. He had a very good structure in place. If you haven't seen Marijuana Inc., the MSNBC production, see it. It's great. However, the federal government threatened him, threatened his county and city attorneys. He capitulated. But this is what I mean by incremental. Moving towards marijuana-specific policies. Lowest priority regulation laws in Massachusetts to Michigan to Washington, Virginia. Why do I name all these states? I wanted to give you an understanding that marijuana is accepted regionally. What's lowest priority laws? Well, they're codified for the most part, and they're de facto, meaning they're actually in law. If police see somebody smoking a joint or have a little weed, they're going to come along, they're going to say, hey, I'm warning you, not going to bust you. Come back through, then I might have to do something. But this way they can save their time, save their resources for more, let's say, insidious or violent crimes, crimes that need immediate attention. It is their lowest priority. Even if it's not codified in law, many areas practice it as well. Okay? These are economic downtimes, not just for individuals, but also for communities and what they can pay and what they can give out for resources to their law enforcement agents. Third question. When has the United States had a bureaucratic policy infrastructure in place to deal specifically with marijuana? I know some of you already, history buffs, might be saying, oh, the marijuana tax in 1937. I'll get to that in a moment. However, we really never have. Never have. So it started the Bureau of Narcotics, the FBN. It was born out of national alcohol prohibition, or the Noble experiment. In 1930, a gentleman who was one of the assistant directors of the alcohol prohibition department named Harry J. Anslinger. He's legendary in drug studies. All right? He took control of the FBN, and he held that control from 1930 to 1962, finally ousted by the Kennedy administration. He used, not a drug war, let's say, he used illicit substance control policy of the United States to make international compacts. He veiled it in criminality. He veiled it in that it was the really the force and proliferation of undocumented workers. So he targeted immigrants by it, and he also veiled it in the Cold War. It was his anger got the best of him. And the Kennedy administration said, "You're not one of us. You're gone." Mid-1960s, the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, the BNDD, was formed. This was Lyndon Baines Johnson's idea of reform of illicit substance control policy on the national level. It was also part of his Great Society, right? And war on poverty didn't last too long when he didn't run for re-election in 1968. And also, moving back a little bit in time, the Marijuana Stamp Tax Act of 1937, this lasted for 32 years. In 1969, a gentleman you might have heard of named Timothy Leary, on purpose got caught with marijuana without a stamp without a stamp he had paid a tax on. This is Dr. Timothy Leary, the psychedelic psychologist from Harvard, tune in, tune out guy. He challenged this law. The Supreme Court, 1969, without Earl Warren, this is not the Warren Court, just transitioning, they said unconstitutional based on Fifth Amendment self-incrimination prohibition. All right? That broke apart there too. So where did we go from here? The Controlled Substance Act of 1970. Richard Nixon comes into office, crafted by the Nixon administration, ratified by an acquiescent Congress, and wanted by a citizenry that was promised the government would get tough on crime. That was one of his his campaign mottos, Nixon's. Get tough on crime. Well, this was part of it. It was an integral part of the war on drugs. It was a centerpiece of the war on drugs. Actually, Nixon coined that term in the 1971 Rose Garden ceremony, announcing more enhancement of the Comprehensive Drug Prevention Act, which has the Controlled Substance Act within it. It wasn't until 1973 that the Drug Enforcement Administration was born. Marijuana was not parsed. Rather, it was grouped with more insidious substances. All the documentation I found, archival information, memos between departments within the White House, news press releases from the White House, never said marijuana. They said marijuana, LSD, opium. Marijuana, cocaine, LSD. Grouped together. Why? Psychologically, that plays big in mass appeal. It's the same drug, or the same dangers, let's say. Same dangers. And I know what you're saying. We know differently now. Sure we do. This is 1972. And you saw that public opinion poll from 1970. Okay? Nixon was a man of illusion. And finally, what is a schedule? Many people talk about the schedule of drugs. Okay? It's a codification of drug categories 1 to 5, 1 being the most severe danger to society, holding no medical properties, and highest rates or chances of addiction physically and psychologically. Once you move from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2, okay, you lose the severity of danger and you gain medical properties, at least acknowledged by the federal government. In each descending rung of that schedule ladder, it becomes more and more a viable medicine or medical use. Marijuana in 1970 was scheduled as a 1. What is it today? It's a 1. What's a 2? Cocaine. There is really something inherently wrong with the policy thinking by the Drug Enforcement Administration that denies, not necessarily that marijuana has medical properties, but that it is physically addictive. No study shows that it is physically addictive. There are studies that show psychological addiction. I'm going to get back to that in a minute. But no studies show that. There is something inherently wrong with policy analysts in the White House for generations. Okay, let's compare some existing regulatory models And what we have at the federal level, this is the federal level for the most part, only states now are beginning to tweak their bureaucratic structures towards marijuana. Alcohol, we had a bureaucratic structure, right? Actually, we debated a lot of different models. We even debated in America in the 19-teens, we debated something called the Gothenburg model, which was community-based, and communities would benefit from alcohol sales. And if you committed an alcohol-related crime, the community punished you in consensus. You wouldn't be jailed necessarily, because that would take away from your family, and that wouldn't benefit the community. We debated all of these. What happened? Prohibition. Honestly, there are studies now that show we were legislatively tired after World War I. And that people that lobbied quickly, the temperance union made a big comeback, lobbied quickly, could push through their legislation. I know that says a lot in the amendment process, but that's what happened. Then we went back to a federal, state, and local regulation. Some examples of that: alcohol, tobacco, firearms, the federal level. Age differences, not so much now, but there were the 18 and 21, right? Dry counties we still have today, surprisingly. So there's all this variation, this nuance with alcohol, specifically tailored to alcohol. Let's look at look at sales first. State liquor commissions, private and state run. My home state of New Hampshire, they have state liquor stores. People come from Massachusetts, they pull over, let's get our liquor cheap. But they can only buy spirits. For those who don't know spirits, it's hard liquor, okay? Then you have to go to another store, we call packies or package stores, to get your beer or wine, okay? California, you do the one-stop shop. You can go to Vaughn's and get everything you need, or everything you want. Differentiation. We don't have that with marijuana, that's quite obvious too. Cigarettes. From the 1600s, 1700s, major crop, denial of health issues, okay? Finally, and then no regulation for years. European nations had regulation well before we did. Then labels. It was in the mid-late 60s. Warning labels. Could be detrimental to your health. Could be. Okay. Federal, state, and local regulations. Health and Human Services, United States Department of Agriculture. Let's not forget it's a crop, folks. Tobacco's a crop, okay? Television ban on advertisement. Age differences. I don't think any state has a 21 age limit, but I know states have 16 and 18. Then they have these weird configurations. If you get a note, or if you come with somebody that's over the age, that's okay to buy for you. All these different differentiations amongst the policies. Also, distance from buildings. I know it's somewhat new to Humboldt. Chico was doing it in 2004. Now the Cal States, I think, are adopting it. It's 25 feet or 50 feet, maybe whole campuses, right? But you can go smoke in certain smoke spots, okay? Think about that. For cigarettes, marijuana, no. Federally prohibition and categorized with other more insidious substances. What a comparison. I want to throw this in too for you. How about prostitution? Yeah, it's federally prohibited as well, okay? Nevada, 10 counties, legal. Difference, right? The states are allowed to do it. Federal government's not busting them, all right? They're allowed to do it. States, medical legalization, but lacking marijuana-specific procedures until of late, okay? Let's look at our fourth question. Since the passage of the CSA and with it national marijuana prohibition, what reform efforts have been successful in challenging the war on drugs? Well, I didn't lie to you. I just didn't tell you the whole truth about federal prohibition being the only marijuana law. 1976, a man by the name of Robert Randall, an attorney, a resident of the District of Columbia, cultivated and obviously then possessed marijuana. He was a glaucoma patient, sufferer, so he wanted relief from that pressure. He grew on his porch. He was busted. It wasn't really a big movement. It wasn't an attempt by him, but he said, hey, I'm into it. I'm an attorney. Let's try this law. He won his conviction was overturned based on a medical necessity. Very rare in America. You have to prove that the harm of the law is greater than the harm from breaking the law. Okay? He proved that in court. In turn, he sued the federal government in another case called Randall versus United States. Then, because he's a District of Columbia resident, the federal government had to provide him with medical marijuana because they allowed for the exception. So then the federal government started this investigative new drug program, it's called, federal medical marijuana. Many of you probably heard of it in myth. They cultivate it, of all places, at the University of Mississippi. Ole Miss, not Humboldt State, Ole Miss. Who was hired to direct that cultivation center? A Republican Party loyalist named Carlton. Okay, last name. However, Randall, in his registry of medical marijuana patients, grew to about 30 to 40. However, George H.W. Bush, in his wisdom, through an executive order, put a moratorium on new patients. It's dwindled now to about 10 to a dozen patients, okay? And they still receive their marijuana cigarettes in a Tommy Gun type of magazine, perfectly rolled, all right? Termination of paraquat spraying of foreign and domestic marijuana crops. What's this? Paraquat's a herbicide, not a good one either. Not as unhealthy, or not say healthy, as damaging as DDT, but not good for you either, folks. In the mid-1970s, the Drug Enforcement Administration was loaning helicopters to the government of Mexico so they could spray poppy fields, and also, in turn, the Mexican government says, you know what, we finished with the poppy fields. You think it'd be okay if we sprayed the marijuana fields? Because it's all going to the United States that we know of. And the DEA said, through the Department of State, this is double-checked, sure, go ahead. We can't supply with the chemicals, though, just the helicopters. They continued spraying. The Center for the Center for Disease Control then reported 17 to 20 cases of respiratory infection. The commonality, they had all smoked weed from Mexico. Many people in government and outside said they're getting what they deserve. And then more rational people said, nobody deserves to get violently ill from smoking marijuana. Moratorium on it, only because there was a lawsuit brought by NORML, National Organization to Reform Marijuana Laws. In it, they didn't sue themselves. Nixon's regulatory policies had been caught in a trap. You know this, your Humboldt students, residents, environmental impact statements. The EPA mandates them. The Drug Enforcement Administration had never filed an environmental impact statement when they allowed this spraying in Mexico. They had to do it. The EPA was pitted against the DEA. The court said, you have to, we're not saying you have to stop spraying, you just have to you have to delay it. You have to put a temporary hold on it until you file an environmental impact statement. The richness of that is too much. They said, to hell with it, we're not going to bother. They stopped it. President Carter put a moratorium on that through executive order. What did Ronald Reagan do? He lifted the moratorium. He started spraying, not in Mexico, and there's I just watched this DVD about this. He started spraying in Georgia and Tennessee. He said, hell with it, I'm not going to worry about the source. I'm going to worry about domestic growth, okay? I'm not going to worry about international. But 1986, 1987, Congress said enough. This is ridiculous. They pushed through legislation that, again, terminated it. Okay. And then rescheduling petitions. We always hear about, why don't we just reschedule for the drug to drop from a Schedule 1 to 2 or 3? Well, one reason is it's called executive obstructionism. Why executive? Because remember, all bureaucratic agencies federally are under the control of the president. In 1974, NORML and Robert Randall petitioned for rescheduling hearings, which has to go through the Food and Drug Administration and then on to the DEA. It wasn't until 1996 they received their final answer after a bunch of court battles, 22 years. The DEA said, there's no reason to hold hearings. We have no new evidence to say marijuana has medical properties or should be changed in schedule. And then finally, 1996, the real break here, the real fracture to federal prohibition, not codified, not as much codified as a challenge, right? 1996, California passes Prop 14, 54 to 46% approximately. So that brings us to this. State incremental marijuana policies, and I want to say challenges, add to that challenges. 2 Supreme Court cases, Oakland Cannabis Buyers Cooperative versus United States, 8-0 ruling. Supreme Court said no, there's no medical exception to the Controlled Substance Act. Now I know what you're saying, wait a minute, they said it in the Randall case. He was a District of Columbia citizen. This was California state residents bringing this. 2005, probably the most famous case that deals with medical marijuana at Supreme Court level, Gonzalez versus Angel Raich. That presented a 10th Amendment argument, states' rights argument. Squashed 6-3. Justice Stevens said in his final paragraph, if you want change of this caliber, take it to the halls of Congress. So much for states' rights on that one, folks. 18 states, though, in the District of Columbia allow medical marijuana. District of Columbia took over 7 years, I believe, to implement their policy. It was passed by voter initiative, and then the federal government said, you know what? We're not going to let you implement it, because if you do implement it, we're going to take all your funds. And here's a news flash. The District of Columbia gets most of their money from the federal government. Until the Obama administration, approximately 2009, was able to push through Congress enough pressure to lift that bar. It's called the Barr Amendment, too, by Representative Barr. he made sure that was passed, that limitation on if they could, on their implementation of their policy. Surprising now, he is the leading lobbyist for the marijuana policy project. He turned libertarian. All right. If you do remember him, he was the big promoter of the Lewinsky affair, of pushing Clinton through the judicial process. Various localities with lowest priority laws and decriminalization codified, as I mentioned before. 2 states legalized, 2 other states reject legalization. Before I get to Montana, I want to say this. If in 2009 you would have put down 4 states in front of me, California, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, and you said 2 are going to legalize marijuana, I would have picked Oregon and California. That's why political scientists, they don't predict a lot. We don't like to. We leave it to the bloggers, okay? Montana, though. Montana had a medical marijuana law, as I said. Just, don't many people have noticed this, went under the radar. They repealed their medical marijuana law, but they didn't take it off the books. They said we need restructuring, okay? We need to make it more soundproof. That's not soundproof, that's a bad word. We need to make it more tax-proof, right? Because that's what the federal government came down upon them for. They are a great example of a state saying, you know what? We're not going to say to hell with this. We're not going to act extreme. We're going to say, what can we do to fix it, to make it tighter, to make it more legitimate, to make it more federally proof, let's say, okay? And here's the great map that geography student Ross Miles made. They're doing great things in geography, folks. As you can see, the map is colored up, and I'll tell you, the yellow says states that have both medical marijuana and have removed jail time for possessing small amounts of marijuana. The second one is states that have removed the possibility of jail time for possessing small amounts of marijuana only. This is significant. Look at these states. Mississippi, North Carolina, in the Bible Belt for the most part, okay? They're not blue states. Why did they do this? Because they're taking away things like racial divide, social economic cleavages that are caused by the drug war. They're removing that. They're saying this is too costly to our citizenry. This is too costly to our economy. Not because of marijuana sales, but because people are now missing time from work. They're paying into the judicial system. The next one, states and districts with medical marijuana laws. And I have to qualify this. Miles did it correctly, but New Hampshire is red, my home state. It is not a citizen-initiated medical marijuana, such as California, where you can go to a doctor and get a suggestive script. In New Hampshire, in many states have toyed with this idea that it'd be physician-initiated. How many physicians are going to initiate that in more or less conservative, moderate states? Not too many. However, you see this. In the last one, states have legalized marijuana as of November 2012, Colorado and Washington. This is, and then Alaska and Hawaii down here in the boxes. I believe I counted this up today, 23 states. Almost half have begun to implement incremental policies towards the acceptance of marijuana. Let's deal with it. Let's stop, having it in myth. Let's codify it in some way we can contain it, maybe garner revenue. How has incremental reform been accomplished? Well, this is really my forte, you could say, my expertise, and this is the chunk of my dissertation. How do advocates reform? Well, I started with public opinion, because that's how you charge public discourse. You go, public opinion, you engage discourse, you enter into the discourse what's called new frames, new messages, okay, new definitions. Those that control the definitions control the policies usually. It is no wonder that federal prohibition has lasted this long. When people have believed the federal government, how could they be lying to us that long on such an issue? I know today it's easy to be skeptical of the federal government, sure. But in 1970, even though trust was down, efficacy was down, citizen belief in government was down, they still believed that they couldn't be telling us blatant lies. So advocates have reframed the issue. Reframed marijuana with various institutional settings counters the deviant messages disseminated by the federal government, private anti-drug groups, and wrongly committed drug addiction clinicians. And I mentioned them a little bit. I want to mention this last group, not to degrade them too much. And these people are researchers, some of them are academics, some of them are private. What they've done is that they've gone along with the definitions because they're also reliant many times on the funding based on those definitions from the federal government. They say things like, most people that come in for drug addiction are also marijuana addicted. That's been shown to be false. That they inflate their numbers, that's been shown to be true. Why? Because they continue to get the money to flow in. National Institutes of Mental Health, National Institutes of Drug Abuse fund these clinicians. Are they all bad people? No, but they're falsely premised. Constitutionally, now it's states' rights, right? We've heard all about that, even though states' rights at the end of the day doesn't say much. It's very vague, 10th Amendment, but still a reframing. Okay? And I'm going to go into that in a minute. Morally, patients' rights, access to medicine, all right? When we thought all drug use was immoral. Changing the understanding of marijuana by presenting scientifically produced facts lays the burden of credibility at the doorstep of promoters of prohibition, instead of the doorstep of anybody using or possessing or cultivating marijuana. Because under the federal scheme of things, all marijuana possessors, all marijuana users are criminals. It doesn't matter if you have a tractor trailer full going from Mexico to Michigan, or if you have one little plant. You're a criminal. Okay? Now the burden is on their doorstep. Prove it. Prove that this is an immoral thing. Prove that everybody should be criminals. Falsehoods versus science-based. This in the last 5 to 10 years, we see studies now that show this out. Criminal endeavor, now personal choice of a leisure act. All right? Am I saying that traffickers that haul tons are not criminals? No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that we need to show a difference in our laws. Again, incremental change. No medical potential. No, it's been changed to patients' rights to access medicine. All right? How'd they push it? How did Marijuana Policy Project lobby and push through a medical marijuana law in Rhode Island, a very conservative, heavily Catholic state? How'd they do that? There's a lot of ill people, a lot of fatally ill people, chronically ill people in Rhode Island, a lot of elderly in Rhode Island. They were okay with medical marijuana. They said, you're denying them that. And they use words like, you could be killing them. They fought fire with fire. And that's what you have to do if you're an advocate. Detrimental to society, only the federal regulatory policies are detrimental to the actual cultivation, policies are detrimental, not the actual cultivation and use of the plant. Last speaker, great presentation, told about how pesticides that are used in the growing of marijuana on public lands are hurting the ecosystem. He's absolutely correct, okay? But he also left the social policy at the doorstep of others to figure out, and rightfully so, okay? He's a natural scientist, all right? But let's be clear. There's nothing intrinsically evil about the plant, folks. I know that's easy to believe today. In the 1970s and 80s, no, that was the main thought in people's heads, and definitely the government was disseminating that message. It's the social policies, the regulatory policies, or lack thereof, that is inherently detrimental. Federal jurisdiction germane to Commerce Clause authority. That's Gonzales v. Raich. That's what they said in the final analysis. However, state-local rights now. Maybe we'll see something more. When I interviewed Americans for Safe Access media director Chris Hermes in 2006, he said, we knew Gonzales v. Raich was probably going to go down, probably was going to fail. He said, if we go to court again and we reach the district and the circuit court levels, we're going to probably forward a Ninth Amendment argument, okay? We'll see. Each of these measures alters the populations associated with marijuana. This is what we call target populations. If you say that all marijuana users and possessors, cultivators are criminals, they don't deserve policy benefits. They deserve punitive measures. They deserve punishment from policies. However, they're not deserving of policy benefits, only punitive means. Measures focus changed to patients deserving of policy benefits or individual freedom. New policies are emerging in the state and local levels now that don't use negative target populations, they use positive target populations. Is this a game of illusions? No, this is a game of defining, of framing properly, okay? 5. It's a major concern. I've heard it a lot since moving here in July to Humboldt area. Won't corporations take over marijuana markets just like they did with alcohol and tobacco? Well, they didn't take over. Corporations really take over alcohol and tobacco growth. They were kind of there at the ground floor, folks. They were already lobbying when it became regulated, okay? Well, first of all, the existing markets are well-defined and related. What do I mean by that? Again, this is an illegal market that has existed for decades. It continues to profit and proliferate. Growing distribution, medical, illegal, and now legal sales in those 2 states. And legal sales, too, if you consider medical marijuana. How do industries typically protect their markets? I'm not an economist. I'll leave that defining and refinement to them, but I know this much. They use regulation, trade agreements, copyrights, patents, network development, and customer satisfaction. Geez, I really have been looking forward to that Monsanto weed. No, You already have a brand in this area. It's Emerald Triangle, Humboldt, right? And then from there, different strains. If you know the subculture at all, you know these terms like train wreck and sour diesel. These things are grown to be the best, not for the quick fix, not for the quick sale like Monsanto's and Archer Daniel Midland do. I'm not saying they do all evil things. I'm saying is that this is a worry. I understand that. Now they can come into town and they can buy up gobs of land and start planting marijuana. Sure they can. Why would the customer base shift? Just over the price? Let me tell you a little secret, and I argue sometimes about this with people. And then they say, oh yeah, I guess you're right. And I don't have the numbers to back me, but just hang with me on this one. Since the 1970s up till today, the price of marijuana has not changed that much. You have better marijuana on the market, which of course can be charged. You can charge more for it. But the same type of weed that was sold in the 1970s, we call Mexican brick or swag, you can probably buy cheaper today, folks. Okay? Can corporations do it better? Probably not. Also, network development, this is key. Imagine how much trust there has to be, all right, for this illegal market to proliferate, to continue to go, when it's all illegal and profit up to $36 billion plus. All right? Keeping the existing illegal market intact as regulation guides those actors into the legal realm. I understand why growers are worried, but there's still a better way to be had and to conduct your business than to stay outside of the legal realm. Okay, protecting markets and evidence of incremental policy network development. All right, first of all, we have medicinal facilities, cooperating state and local officials that advance the articulation of the marijuana cause and regulation without federal intrusion. That's definite. All right, county to county, city to city. Not all, but some. You have a developing market. What I'm pointing out here, you just don't have a developing network of growers and people that distribute marijuana, but also amongst public officials, elected and appointed, okay, that's growing and accepting how they can contain marijuana and garner the best profit from it, let's say, okay, and also that it can be socially allowed. Supply chain, seed sellers, hydroponic shops, physicians, and attorneys. That's already in place. There's no doubt about this. All right? Look around you. You can go to the North Coast Journal, and you can see advertisements for marijuana-specific attorneys. All right? And then there are attorneys that deal with drug cases in general. And then you have physicians, not only ones that write suggestive scripts. And I want to make this point. Doctors do not write prescriptions for medical marijuana. They can't. That's a federal license. They write suggestive prescriptions, okay? Or notes, as they call them. But you already have that in place. Seed sellers from British Columbia to Europe, okay? This is already in place. So inside bureaucracy, you have a fledgling, incremental, bureaucratic structure that's being designed specifically for marijuana. And then outside, you have a much more developed market, okay, of growers and professionals. That brings us to question 6. Again, and it goes back to question 2. Is legalization the ultimate answer so as to end illegal growing on public lands or mass growing in communities such as Humboldt, Santa Cruz, and Mendocino? I'll say this, more likely not, but let's example what really is the problem with growing on public lands. And as the past speaker said, you can't grow mass amounts of tomatoes on public lands or tribal lands as well, okay? Who's doing most of this? It's drug trafficking organizations. And I dare say, because of the evidence the last speaker produced, when he said, when we found these rat-killing pesticides, we also found DDT. Well, DDT is illegal in America. DDT is illegal in Canada. Where is it legal? Mexico, Central America, South America. Yeah, drug trafficking organizations are bringing up what they can get their hands on, all right? Their market lines would be cut off. Marijuana has sound regulatory infrastructure backed by state, local, and federal authorities. Think about this. Why would you buy from illegal growers when you could buy from legal growers in Humboldt and Mendocino, Kern County? Why? Why would you do that? Not only that, licensed growers would occupy both medical and leisure markets, thereby curbing, if not eliminating, collateral violence and crime. This is important. Eva Bertram, a scholar down at the University of California, Santa Cruz, 1996, published a book called Drug War Crimes, a great work. She says, prohibition breeds collateral crime. It breeds illegality. It breeds criminals. Legalization decriminalization, medical allowance cuts those illegal lines off. You could also count on law enforcement resources regarding illegal growing distribution be honed. They wouldn't have to deal with busting grow centers in Humboldt County. They would bust those people growing on public lands. Whether they're licensed or not, you still can't grow on public lands, okay? To analogize, how viable are moonshiners, speakeasies, and those that grow their own tobacco as market profiteers? It's a neat novelty. It's a neat show on cable, folks. The moonshiners, if you haven't seen it. They're not making a lot of money. They love the lifestyle, okay? Not a lot of people on the corner selling rolled cigarettes either. Speakeasies, nah, they really don't exist for the most part. You can go any watering hole and get a drink. Why am I exaggerating this point? Because that's what I'm talking about if marijuana was legalized or at least had a better regulatory structure or regulatory structure that was specific to that substance. Also, these groups are social novelties at best, serving time at worst. We know this. All right. 7. Regarding, so I'm paraphrasing, but he actually did say this. There is no bridge. This, Measure I was no bridge or balance to illegal grow operations in residential settings. It's not that. And I asked him, well, you can see, I said, at least superficially, how Measure I was targeting growers. He goes, I can see that, but we're not. And I believed him. I really believe him. He said it 2 or 3 times, adamant about this. We're not doing this. What we're doing is we're targeting people that use electricity for illegal means. Yes, he said, for the most part, they're probably growers. However, it's a public safety issue. It's a housing opportunity issue. It's a health issue. It's an agricultural issue. It's a land use issue, okay? That's how we want to categorize it. If this bridges growers to us, that's fine, but we also contain it. We contain other collateral problems from illegal growing as well by doing this. And also, people pay their equal fair share, let's say. However, Measure I is one of the many city powers that can be employed to reap revenue from and contain illegal grow operation. No doubt about that. He said that over and over. He says, look, this is a power we have. You know what's not a power we have? Fighting the federal government. Does this get the federal government off our back? Does this get the federal government from stop calling Nancy Diamond and threatening the city council? He says, maybe it will. Let's hope. Pastor Measure I was a strong statement, stronger policy maneuver that superficially might say to growers, we do not want you in our communities. Again, he wasn't saying that. He was saying we want all illegal activity dealing with electricity use. We also want to open up the housing market. Remember, you're not just competing with residents, year-long residents, lifelong residents, you're competing with students as well. Establishes a boundary as to where and how growers can influence the local housing and economic markets as well as marijuana policies. It brings them into the discussion by, yes, I guess, starving them a little bit in a way, right? If this is what it's needed to jolt the system, to jolt that illegal market, Shane Britton and his city council is willing to do that, not to alienate growers. He understands 1 out of every $4 cash dollars in Humboldt County is from grower. It's from the growers. All right. Number 8, last question, then we'll get on to the interviews and the conclusions. Thanks for being patient. In turn, then how can we? How can marijuana communities bridge the gap between reticent growers and new regulations? Well, first of all, regulation of marijuana would be categorized within other policy areas such as public health, land use, and agriculture. And I emphasize this over and over. It must be. Now, federally at least, it's just a criminal endeavor. All right? Again, the Department of Justice controls it. The Drug Enforcement Administration, enforces it. Okay? The court system enforces it. It's punitive. It's criminally based. States are finally saying we have to categorize it correctly. Then we can deal with it. Is it just social? No, it's other things too. It's economic as well. Okay? But it's regulatory. Community dialogue beyond punitive means. And this is what Shane Britton's talking about. Okay? Going beyond just busting you. All right? Sending you off to jail or making you pay huge fines that you can't afford. So public dialogue that admits, all right, that marijuana is probably here to stay. It pretty much is, folks. Open dialogue with federal agencies. This is key. Federal agencies, you have to get them to cooperate. What are they doing now? Again, they just send threatening letters. They stand by their guns, no pun intended. All right? They say, no, we're going to bust your dispensaries year after year. We're going to have a season for it. All right? When is that season? Probably the summertime. Right? The climate's better. We can come out there and get you. All right? We need an open dialogue with federal agencies. Rescheduling promotion by state and local governments. Now, I mentioned some rescheduling petitions. Those were brought by advocacy organizations and individuals, not by state and localities. However, Gonzalez v. Raich, going back to that court case, is interesting because in it, amicus curiae briefs were filed. Those are friends of the court briefs, which give the court an better idea of the issues at hand. Guess who filed those amicus briefs? The states of Louisiana, states of Alabama, states, I believe also Oklahoma, filed for Raich. They said in their brief, they said, you know what, we don't believe that marijuana should be legalized, even for medical use. What we do believe in, though, is the states can determine if they want it. Okay? So we haven't seen rescheduling petitions sponsored by state and local governments, but maybe that's what should happen as well. These are just suggestions. Specific zoning, education, and marketing, too. Yes, we do need to educate about the substance. It is a drug, okay? We need to educate based on facts, though, that it is not LSD. All right? It is not cocaine. It is not alcohol. Is it better? That's not the issue. That's an individual decision. All right? Proper education rather than myth-based or misnomer-based education. All right. It's called the honeycomb. Thought you'd like it. Bridging to growers. Measure I. Saving housing and economic markets. Just to review here. Local businesses knowingly accept grower cash. This is what's already going on, how we're already bridging. I asked 2 or 3 local business owners. They were very candid. I like that. Very nice. And they admit that they deliver their goods, let's say. Not marijuana. They deliver food and such to grow centers, to trimming centers, and they get paid in cash, and they get paid well, and there's never a problem. And I said, oh, well, here's an idea. I could tell, maybe we can tell somehow, we can tease out a methodology here to discern how much cash is being spent or how much cash is produced from marijuana cultivation. And I asked some of these business owners, what's the difference between the cash that comes from quote-unquote legitimate or legal means and that comes from growers? And this is what 2 out of 3 said. I don't know. I've never had revenue without grower money. That says a lot in this community, folks. But this is already existing. This is a bridge. They know what they're doing. Can they get busted for it? Sure. I think the IRS, for one, could start there. Illegal job market hires students, younger people, and those seeking extra income. Again, the trim jobs, okay? Getting rid of stems and all that stuff they don't need as well, disposing of waste, okay? That exists today, all right? Where do they recruit? HSU. I know a lot of students that have taken these jobs. They work 14 to 20 hours, they get paid in cash, and they know nothing else. Local law enforcement not arresting 215 cardholders. I guess in Arcata, they've gone along with this de facto. They can't do it codified. They can't do it by law. And a lot of communities are turning this way, Santa Cruz as well. This is already happening. So are we bridging? Yes. But we still need a tighter regulation that's marijuana specific. And I think that's what Shane Britton was trying to say. Interviews. So I conducted these interviews, 3 campaign directors from Washington, Colorado, and Oregon. This is, in Washington, it passed by 10%, Colorado by 9%, Oregon, it failed. All right. First question, what regulatory bureaucratic infrastructure is either already in place in your state or you believe will have to be implemented following a successful campaign for marijuana legalization? Oregon, not surprisingly, gave the worst answers. They were probably the worst organized as well, according to the New York Times and Los Angeles Times, not just me. Liquor and Wine Commission, but a lack of medical marijuana dispensary regulation. Even though they have medical marijuana, it was a strong structure. And they were just going to let their alcohol or their wine commission take over. Okay? Again, not specifically designed for marijuana. Washington, 1-year expert-based study so as to establish new regulation in existing alcohol commission. What do I mean by this? So December 1st, the Alcohol Commission, which lost a lot of responsibility because Washington went from state-run liquor distribution to privatization, they will take over and they will control marijuana cultivation, distribution, and use, sales, and everything. However, within that same time frame, a committee will be created and they will recruit cultivators, they will policymakers, public officials, academics to make the best marijuana regulatory scheme they can for their state. Okay, and that will run from December 6th to next December 6th, and then a marijuana commission will be in place in Washington. Well organized, very friendly people to deal with. Colorado, medical marijuana regulation and vertical integration. What do I mean by this? Colorado probably has the best of the 18 states. They have the best medical marijuana bureaucratic structure, and they say new growers, those that grow just for leisure, those that now jump on board and get licenses can vertically integrate into the medical system, and we will allow them to grow for medical or leisure use, okay? Second, does your campaign feel any anti-legalization backlash from growers? And I wanted to know this because many people say that was the downfall of Prop 19 in 2010, so much backlash from the illegal market. Oregon, yes, but education of the new law would allow for acceptance. Worry would diminish when punitive measures are removed. Problem with this was that their educational measures were going to take place after the law was passed, not before the law was passed. People are scared still, okay? They don't want it. Washington, yes, from the medical marijuana community. The No on 502 committee was headed by a former grower. Why? Because again, they thought their profits would be cut into, all right? Colorado, no, benefits of buy-in too appealing because their structure is so sound, so marijuana specific, all right? Questions 3 and 4. What voters are you targeting and why? Why do I want to know this? I want to see who was backing legalization. That only makes sense. Go to the heart of the question. And 4, did you run a new voter campaign targeting people that normally don't vote but would vote for legalization? I wanted to find that out. Oregon needed 100,000 new voters of all persuasions. They did run a new voter campaign through their legalization campaign. They only got about 85,000 new voters as far as I know. Wasn't enough. Washington, existing voter base serves campaign very well. Remember, go back to the second public opinion chart I showed you. 46% women said legalization, it was okay. They approve it, right? That's key. They wanted mothers. Why did they want mothers? Because mothers, in another term, are called soccer moms, and they vote big, okay? If we can get them, if we can show them that marijuana legalization is safer than marijuana prohibition, they can feel good about it. They can feel good that their children will be educated, that their communities will be safe, that collateral violence, collateral crime will diminish through legalization. They were able to do that. Also, libertarians, Democrats, and Republicans in Washington, especially libertarians, are already pro-marijuana, pro-legalization up there. They did not run a new voter campaign. They did not. They relied on their bases. Colorado, they relied on younger, disenfranchised communities. So younger people, we saw the numbers, overwhelmingly say yes to legalization. Disenfranchised communities, because usually disenfranchised people, marginalized voters, they need a reason to vote. That reason could be legalization. And middle-aged women, again, soccer moms, okay? No, they didn't run a new voter campaign. And you know why? Because Colorado was a swing state. Who did their job for them? Brian Vicente, the assistant director of this campaign, told me it was beautiful. He said, no, we let the Obama and Romney campaigns run those new voter campaign recruitments, and then we just reaped the benefit. And they surely did. All right. Conclusions. 1, marijuana is a substance, whether medically or leisurely, is here to stay. Let's face it, all right? You don't throw $40 billion away. You can call it a habit. You can call it a social acceptance. You can call it a culture, subculture, whatever you want. It's here to stay. Public opinion institutionally accepted, except at the federal level of government. No real breaks at the federal level. History of marijuana regulation is a history of attempts to apply the control models of other substances to marijuana, namely alcohol and cigarettes. Not going to go anywhere. Just imagine if you tried to apply prostitution regulation to cigarettes. All right? I know that's a lot at once, but just think about that. It doesn't work, right? Marijuana-specific regulation is needed. Existing illegal markets and growers can bridge to legal proper markets and integrate to other avenues of trade and social use as well. All right? Because these days, medical people don't have to smoke marijuana, right? Tinctures, cookies, cakes, whatever. It's just a diversified market. Conclusions 2. I don't know what you call that one, but I like it. And it's a good way to end. The economic and social benefits of marijuana are too alluring to ignore and continue to be enhanced if properly addressed and not mythicized with ideology and misnomers. Hopefully we've come out of that stage of marijuana regulatory policy. All right? We've left the Nixon era, the Reagan intensification era, okay? And not that all our future presidents have to be Democrats or liberals, but that we secure proper policies and then future administrations adhere to them. Marijuana communities are addressing the substance in a progressive manner by placing the substance within accepted policy categories such as public health, land use, and agriculture, and many more to come. All right? Education of the substance, lastly, education of the substance and bureaucratic infrastructure is incrementally developing. We just have to see what crops up. I thank you very much.
about 20 minutes for Q&A, and actually, as you form your ideas, and those of you that do need to take off. I just wanted to share with you the headline in the Washington Post was Public University, where else? Humboldt County forms Medical Marijuana Research Institute. I couldn't remember it earlier. That was also the headline on Fox News. So we have, as I say, 20 minutes for questions. I'd like to open it up to the audience for a speaker.
Any? Yes, sir.
Yeah. When alcohol was made illegal, they had to pass an amendment to the Constitution.
Correct.
So for marijuana to be made illegal, why was no amendment ever passed? And is it possible that there may be a Supreme Court ruling that will find that the Controlled Substance Act is actually not valid?
Again, that's a great question. And Gonzales v. Raich, they tried that, right? And they said the Commerce Clause, based on a precedent called Wickard v. Filburn, which was based on wheat rationing in the 1940s, they said the Commerce Clause can control intra and interstate commerce, and also it can control a class of activities that includes black market commodities. It doesn't have to be legal, because for the containment and the public safety of containment of crime and public safety. But, however, like I said, there might be another argument coming forward through the courts based on Ninth Amendment. Those laws not prescribed specifically to the federal government, but are retained by the citizenry. That might be coming forward too. And yes, you might see that. I think, and this is a good lead-in to what is happening now. There's a district court case that's moving forward based on the inability of the DA to hear petitioning schedules, repetitioning schedules. I think you might see, if the federal government acts quickly, if they act at all in the next 4 years with a more favorable administration, a rescheduling from Schedule 1 to 2. However, rescheduling from 1 to 2 would still make the substance illegal. It would just allow for medical use, okay? So yeah, absolutely, yes, sir.
Wouldn't that rescheduling open it up for research also?
Absolutely. That's another thing, too, that not just the federal government would sanction the research, but research institutes, such as the UCs, could endeavor. Yeah.
Right. So it would be socio-economic benefit to
Oh, that's a great point.
universities and such.
Absolutely. Economic, health, land use. That's another thing about cannabis, that you don't have to furrow the land, as you have to wait on the furrowing of the land, that it robs the land of minerals less than other crops. So yeah, there's a lot of research that hasn't been done since the 1930s and 40s, especially on hemp, the non-THC cannabis. Yeah, it would open it up greatly, sure.
And in this community, there is quite a bit of byproduct that doesn't get used. It gets just burned up.
Yeah.
And contributes to carbon.
That's right. Hemp stock, for one. It could be reused,
And
absolutely.
there could be centers
Yep.
for disposing of that and using it in other hemp products.
I think that's a great point, that the proliferation of markets would not just be to the leisure use or smoking or medical, that it would open up and develop new industries and new markets. I'm not a futurist. I'm not one of ideals necessarily idealistic, but it seems that is reasoned. Absolutely. Yes, Paul?
Also, the whole subject of marijuana is only half of the equation. You mentioned the hemp, but there is some reason to believe that, marijuana is a multi-billion-dollar industry, but the hemp industry is a multi-trillion-dollar.
That's right. Worldwide, right? Worldwide.
So the effect of marijuana liberalization on the development of what was identified in March of this year by President Obama as a strategic resource. The hemp industry has economic drivers that dwarf the marijuana industry.
That's right, it does. Because you can go everything from clothing to rope, and actually all the ropes used by our soldiers in World War II were made out of hemp. So yeah, the multiple uses, it's incredible.
Cannabis is the only crop that produces complete nutrition and sustainable biofuels from the same harvest.
Yeah, and there was also a bureaucratic structure, regulatory structure for hemp up to World War II. Yeah, a little past.
There was an exception to the Marijuana Tax Act.
That's right.
It has historical precedent, but the ecological implications of cannabis agriculture have yet to even
Sure.
be put on the table for discussion. And cannabis versus climate change is the next phase of awareness that's going to come to this issue that most people aren't even aware of.
That's why I think the incremental policy is the best, that these floodgates of enterprise are not open too fast, because then they can be taken over, they can be corrupt, and misused or perverted, if you will. Yes, sir.
I think you said 26% of the cash economy.
Yes, sir. According to Jennifer Budwig, yes.
How much is the cash economy? Does that mean like not credit cards or checks?
This is the whole economy, I believe, is 1.6 billion annually in Humboldt County. 415 million of that is the cash she's identified. So she says that $415 million that is cash out of the 1.6 is grower. It's more than cash. I know what you're saying, right? No, it doesn't. The 1.6 includes credit and other currency, I guess you could say.
Okay, so what percentage of the total economy in Humboldt County is marijuana?
26%, according to her.
Of the total economy?
Growers cash, yeah.
It'd be 160.
160, yeah. Is that
Well, it's one, if it's
1 in 4?
1/4 of the total economy.
Oh, I see.
If it's 1/4 of the cash economy, then it would be about 1/16 of the total.
All right, yeah.
There's a question over here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Jason, you're relying on Budwig's figures.
I am.
And her methodology was clearly super conservative. She
That's
clearly
right.
missed some major
Yeah.
factors, so that I really would caution you about using her figures. I think they're way low.
No, and you know what? I'm not an economist. I'm using her results, and she does admit to being very conservative in her tally, in her methodology. I think that's safer than saying, hey, it's 40%, right? But I agree with you. This is the only numbers I have. And so, yeah.
And just as a quick follow-up to that, really quick, just for everybody here, February 26th, Jennifer Budwig will actually be giving a talk on the potential economic impact on Humboldt County if marijuana is legalized. So this will be a great opportunity to come and ask her about her methodology.
That's right. Go at it. Economists love that, by the way. They love it when you attack their methodology. Here first. Go ahead.
Can you elaborate more on Oregon's education program that they were going to implement if it were to be passed?
Yeah, they were going to, as far as I know, a guy named Paul Stanford ran their campaign. He said they were going to bring in the leading cultivators and distributors and talk to them about, how they can properly do this within the law. Not more than that, though. He didn't want to elaborate. He was also, their campaign was also based on what's called the Treaty Convention of 1961, which is partly an agreement between nations. I'm not so familiar with that. So it seemed, again, as the LA Times and New York Times reported, the Oregon campaign, and not to disparage, was more disorganized than the other campaigns. So nothing firm.
So they weren't even talking to growers before the measure?
I would think they were, but again, I don't know for fact. Yeah, it's a good question, right? Yes, sir.
At the beginning of your presentation today, you were saying the resistance came from law enforcement because they would have to change some of their enforcement tactics to, just eliminate busting people, I guess.
Yeah.
My point is there's that opportunity for them to do that.
Right.
Because in Colorado, for instance, the person who runs the whole program for Colorado actually was the head of their narcotics agency.
Yeah.
And he's actually running a bang-up show, as you say.
No, let me say this, that my point was that federal authorities benefit from the policy, prohibition so much, it's federal law enforcement. There is a group called LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, that is in different states and localities. No, they say that prohibition is more damaging to law enforcement resources, time-consuming, and really puts the public in danger rather than safe. It's the federal authorities and law enforcement that benefit most from it, yes.
But how does that paradox weigh out? Because Washington, D.C. has a medical marijuana law that's run by the federal government.
They do, but again, the registry is closed. George H.W. made sure of that. There's no new patients going on it. So they're the exception, the very small exception. Yes, ma'am.
All of those patients won that right through court.
They did too,
fought
yes,
for that.
yes.
One guy took him 10 years to get it.
It's called the Alliance for Cannabis Therapeutics. That was the group Robert Randall started and in turn sponsors these people in court. Yes, sir.
You mentioned about regulation. It felt like it wasn't going to be that difficult, but the whole black market, I don't think that would just disappear with this regulation, and then you would be set up again for another penal, another law enforcement.
Yeah. Well, breaking the law is breaking the law if I grow tobacco illegally. That's what I was trying to say. Well, the black market will never go away on any substance, right? Moonshiners. But how viable are they as an economic study even? Not too much. How many people grow tobacco in mass? How many people, how many speakeasies are illegal, right? There are illegal dance clubs all through New York City, but then they're known and they're shut down. The point here is that, you're right, you're never going to stop the black market, but you really diminish its incentive for existing when you have the ability for people to license up and to join the legal realm. But I know what you're saying, it's not easy. Regulatory implementation is never easy. I didn't mean to say that if I did. Yes, sir, and then.
One of the things that happened with Prop 19 was that the dispensary people and others with big money got to define the terms of how the law was going to look like.
Yeah.
This is a major problem for small mom and pop growers that populate the Emerald Triangle.
Yeah.
So this process is about to unfold again now.
Right, yeah, it's going to hit the ballot.
So I would expect that if we continue to be excluded from the plans for the future, that this region is going to have to build its own infrastructure and regulatory thinking.
Yes.
Perhaps by depending upon the quality of the name, Emerald
The
Triangle
brand,
and
yeah.
Brand, yeah.
Let me say this.
Suggested.
Let's go back. No, that's why I mentioned Colorado and Washington. Colorado said vertical integration. We want those people brought in the easiest possible way. Washington said, no, we're going to invite marijuana cultivators that are illegal and they're growing maybe for the medical industry or maybe not. We're going to invite them in to be on this commission to devise a bureaucratic structure that is specifically made for marijuana. You're absolutely correct. That bridge has to be made. What Shane Britton and the Arcata City Council is doing is they're containing it in case legalization goes through, that their public health, their land use, and their agricultural policies are already set. And yet they can have an open discourse with the growers. Now the mom and pop growers, they're not the ones that necessarily are going to profit the greatest from the new markets, right, if legalization went through. However, they will be legal and they can do what they want within the confines of their own home. There has to be limits to regulation, right? I think 99 plants now if you're a medical grower, and most states have adopted that have medical marijuana. But bringing those people in to consult with them is the key, right? So you have not only promote your own brand, but you have a regulatory scheme that was specific to your area. Yeah. And then.
As far as integrating the community on the pop growers,
Yeah.
Woods and I have also had discussions about appellations where in France, the Champagne region, they
Right.
actually regulate how much the grower can grow.
That's right.
So it's equaled out amongst everyone,
Yeah.
and it actually benefits the community
Absolutely.
in a sense. And I don't know if there's some sort of studies that can be processed through,
Well,
your organization on how to maybe somehow structure that where it can be totally integrated, where we're not going to lose those dollars and we can brand it through this appellation type of situation.
I think one thing going for is that the network that's already existing of the illegal market that has continued for generations, and two, there are organizational structures that are better suited probably for marijuana than are for alcohol, let's say, that can be applied. And again, this is trial by error sometimes, right? It's not easy. Let me go to this lady right here. She had a question.
I'm curious to know what's the range of what policy thinkers are thinking of.
Yeah.
Where is it appropriate to grow, including residential, rural residential, what did Colorado figure out so far? We live in Orleans, and I feel like we live in a sacrifice zone. It's too intense in our poor little riparian neighborhood, and I feel sometimes listening to this, which, much of it makes a whole lot of sense, but I have this queasy feeling like I'm listening to an argument that nuclear energy is clean energy.
Oh, no.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, where do you put the,
Yeah.
that aspect of it is hard to live right next door to all around.
It's a great question. No, I'm very sympathetic to people that feel that they're being pressured or being maybe forced out of their area. Again, zoning, and I did mention that just in passing. I'm sorry I didn't emphasize it. Zoning is very important. You don't want an airport next to your house. You don't want an industrial center next to your house. You don't want a grow operation of 5,000 plants next to your house. You just don't, okay? Zoning would be key. That would be too. We remember this, that not only legalization, let's say, or decriminalization or medical allowance, at least cultivation, would not only open up, it would also contain. All right? That, yeah, a lot of these areas would be cut off. Like such areas that have a great proliferation now, they would probably sacrifice a lot of growing land to bring it back to residents and other needs, such as agriculture, let's say. No, this is a thing that policy makers need to know. That, you know, it's not about being pro. It's about being, it's a balance that suits the citizenry. And let's say this, not all counties, just like not all counties in Kentucky have, can allow alcohol, not all counties in California will say, we want weed growth here. They should be able to determine it. You know, it's very sympathetic towards that, empathetic. Yeah.
And there's not, I think, a lot of counties that say 99 plants are okay. It's more like what, I don't know, I mean, it's far less than that. And
Yeah.
what our experience has been is 99 on 5 sites around is
Yeah.
just too much.
Absolutely, and I was just using a generic number that I've heard in different states. But yeah, customization. I never used that word, I should have. Customization, that's what has to happen, right? Yeah. Also, think about this, the tobacco companies, and they grow tobacco in North Carolina and that area. They can't grow in the middle of residential areas, and they shouldn't be allowed to as well. Sure.
We have time for one more question. We want to make sure everybody
Yeah.
gets out of here on time and we're able to close up the room.
Sure, sure. Dan, we'll go to newbie. Thank you, though. Yeah, Dan.
I was just going to ask, so with the zoning, would you say it's still allowed to have a plant or two, just limit the number of plants?
Well, yeah, we go to the Shane Britton's tomato analogy, right? Anybody can grow a couple tomato plants. You can't grow 1,000 tomato plants in your house. So yeah, again, this is zoning, this is regulation, containment that benefits, right? And this is a hard thing to come by. This takes a lot of discourse, a lot of community involvement. But you know what? It's better than living on myth and living on always marijuana growth always being a criminal endeavor. All right? Thank you.